Hello and welcome to Friends with Deficits. I'm your host, Adam Sultan, and I have a riddle for you. What do pizza, dirt, puppy's breath, and mahogany all have in common? Well, if you're a fan of Demeter Fragrance, you probably know they're all names of some of Demeter's extensive line of pick-me-up spray colognes, lotions, and other scented products. And my next friend, Mark Crames, is the head of Demeter and will tell you all about it. I had a great time talking with him about perfume, which if you don't know already is my jam. I think Demeter might even have a jam fragrance. We also covered some of the setbacks and challenges with his company and his health. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Friends with Deficits. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Mark Crames. We could start from the top if you want to say your name and where you work and all that stuff.
I'm Mark Crames, I'm the chief perfumer and one of the owners of Demeter Fragrance Library. My wife and I together own about 83% of the company. And then there are 4 or 5 other people who own small pieces, either through sweat equity or investment.
And when did you bought it out, right?
In 2002. It was started by a gay couple in Greenwich Village in 1996 with, quite frankly, a concept that was much more creative than anything I might have been able to develop myself.
Can you talk about the concept?
Well, Demeter is based on the idea that there are beautiful smells in the world that get lost in more complex perfumery. So Demeter specializes in what's called single notes, which means that the fragrances express their nature immediately and don't change over time. And the idea was to capture the great smells of nature in the garden. So the first 3 fragrances were dirt, tomato, and grass. So it was a very, very niche and natural concept. The fragrances are highly natural. While we actually use synthetic materials in many of the fragrances, there's no artificial color. There's no synthetic binders or emulsifiers. The alcohol is naturally fermented from corn. The whole idea was to make the fragrance as natural as possible, yet be able to cover this full range of nature. Of course, the brand continued to evolve, and we ended up making things like angel food cake and frozen margarita. So it moved sort of past that idea of nature into general experience. But the idea stayed the same about trying to capture in a very photorealistic way certain smells, which is different from the way more traditional perfumery captures those things, and what I consider to be a redacted and concentrated version that doesn't really reflect the true nature of the object all the time.
Would that receive, or did it receive, like, criticism from, the idea that fine fragrance should be a combination of notes, and like, why would you just want to smell one thing? Like, you could pull an orange out of the fridge or something, and if you wanted to smell that.
It was a controversial approach, and I think, quite frankly, initially was thought more of within the industry than by the consumer. But single note fragrance is really having its day today. But we still do it differently from the designer brands. They still feel the need to dress it up and try and make it more sophisticated. And I think you lose the real beauty. It makes it more like perfume than the real experience. If I'm making jasmine, I want you to feel like you're standing in a field of jasmine, living, breathing, in context. I think that's very different from the concentrated, redacted versions of jasmine that you get in traditional perfumery.
Okay, well, how about, the idea that fine fragrance is an art form, and you're not actually trying to do some, natural smelling thing, and you're trying to create something beyond that?
I think for many people, that's probably true, but I think the answer to that is you don't need a ball gown every day of your life. You wouldn't wear it to work on a Tuesday.
Right.
You need comfortable clothes and work clothes for different contexts. And designer fragrance has become a ball gown. It really doesn't work on Tuesday afternoon all the time.
Right. On the other hand, who's wearing pizza or dirt? Some of your fragrance names.
Well, those are two radically different things
Hmm.
because pizza was an experiment. I have one of the things that happened is I thought the company had got a little bit off the rails with the concept by the time I bought it, and they were 6 years into their development. So we got fragrances like lobster and mildew
Wow.
that I didn't think were really wearable fragrances. Although I got to tell you, people still buy mildew. I have no real explanation for that,
Does it smell like mildew?
but it does.
Is
And
it dangerous? Is it like toxic or anything?
no, people find that attractive. It brings up a lot of people say that it reminds them of the first time that they turn the air conditioner on in the spring.
Okay.
So it's a sign of spring, and I think people enjoy that.
Hmm.
A certain quotient.
Yeah.
So I had modified the mission of the company when I bought it to making any wearable fragrance that you want. So it was about wearability, not just about any smell.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're a wearable fragrance company, it seemed to me that should be a decision factor in what we made commercially. And so that was pretty much the end of the lobsters and the mildews until about 8 or 9 years ago, where it seemed to me that what had been acceptable as a wearable fragrance was expanding. There were a number of brands who were doing promotions. Pizza Hut did a pizza candle. We did Flame for Burger King. We did Cheeto for Cheetos. Now, some of those were publicity stunts, but people loved those fragrances, and they wore them.
Did those companies reach out to you, or did you find them?
Yeah. At the end of the day, if you're going to do a publicity stunt that's based on identifiable real-world smell, most people end up finding their way to our door because there's not many other people who do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, we just did an Annie's pretzel fragrance. Those projects are fun stuff. I like doing those because they're challenging.
And when you mention like making scents that are wearable that people want, how do you decide what's going to be the next scent?
We get a ton of suggestions from our fans, and about half of what we make comes from those suggestions. So we're very much in touch with what people are talking about in the scent.
Are there trends?
There's always a trend.
What would it be in your company? Like notes or materials or?
When I think about trends, I think about what is the fragrance style. Like we've been in a period, I think for quite a while right now, where people are wearing lighter, fresher fragrances. Transparency became a big deal in a fragrance.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of white musks. So right now, I think the trend is towards fragrances that make bigger statements.
Okay.
That don't just blend in and enhance, but actually make a separate statement. So the only fragrance that we've released this fall is Oak, which is a big, bold, rich, luxurious fragrance. That's the direction I think things are moving.
Cool. Do you think it's moving for your company at least to more, I don't know, pleasant or natural fragrances? Like, is there going to be a trend? Or are people going to want more like pizza versus oak?
We went through this period where people were indicating that savory was going to be wearable, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it panned out. And we haven't followed up on the pizza at all, which is really, I think, more of a jokey kind of fragrance at this point.
Right.
I mean, it's a good pizza fragrance, but it's still, does that make it wearable? Not to me.
Yeah. Have you considered room fragrances? Like pizza in the kitchen or something like that?
Well, we make diffusers. So
Yeah,
we make
okay.
environmental fragrances and candles. And some of those fragrances are more meaningful and environmentally. Like baby powder is our top selling fragrance in wearable form, but Thunderstorm is our top selling fragrance in environmental form, diffuser and candle.
Huh. I just smelled baby powder and kitten fur at my local HEB, which I discovered you guys stock there.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And sunshine too.
But they do all three of those fragrances do share a musky base.
Yeah, I can see that. And how does a perfume company get into HEB? And for those who don't know, that's a giant grocery chain in Texas.
I'll make a confession. We make great fragrances, but we may not be the greatest sales company in the world because I never really was focused on sales. I was much more focused on the product.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought if we made a better mousetrap, people would come to us. So I never really thought about it in that context. Sales are sales. They come. If you
Right.
make a great product, people are going to come.
Did they reach out to you?
And HEB ended up reaching out to us when they were going back into fragrance. That's correct.
I didn't. So they're in fragrance? I didn't even know that.
HEB was actually in the food space one of the biggest cosmetic sellers in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
And they exited the category, and then about 3 or 4 years ago decided to go back into it. They were looking for a very particular kind of single and dual note fragrances, so they reached out to us, and for us it's been a great partnership.
That's
They're
cool.
a fantastic company to work with.
How did you find out? Had you been to Texas?
Yes, I actually have one of my best friends lives in Austin, so I'm down in Austin a couple of times a year.
Oh, cool.
I also used to do a lot of work on the border, so I spent a lot of time in Laredo and McAllen over the years.
Was that with perfume?
Yeah, doing border sales.
What's the border market like?
And it's a good market. Like the duty free market at the border is a good market. And in my youth, the only way to really work that market was to be down there 2 or 3 times a year. So I was.
Okay. So who's the perfumer or perfumers?
That's my primary job.
So you're the main nose, as they call it?
I am the chief perfumer.
Okay.
And most of what we do is made under my supervision, and about 25% I actually do the blending, the final blend. I work with other perfumers and other fragrance houses. In other words, we don't make our own fragrance oil. That's a different process than actually making the colognes and body lotions and perfume oils that we make. The core fragrance oil is made by other companies that specialize in making those concentrated oils. And I usually work with their perfumers in development to get what I want. And then about a quarter of the time, I'll modify it. It varies from place to place, but for example, I doubt that Christian Dior is making any of their fragrances in-house. They're working with a
Right.
Givaudan or an IFF or a Firmenich to develop that fragrance. They have evaluators in-house. They have people who will review that fragrance and have expertise in how to put those things together. But actually making it is different from designing it.
Right. So are you more of an evaluator?
I'm more of an evaluator. I do some perfumery, but I do 3 times as much evaluation as I do actual perfumery.
Are there any that you are proud of that you've made that, are your kind of stamp?
Well, kitten fur is mine.
Kitten fur? Okay.
So that's probably the one that I'm the proudest of because it was the hardest to make.
What inspired kitten fur besides kittens?
I have been asked for kitten fur and puppy's breath forever. I worked on those fragrances they were working on puppy's breath when I bought the company in 2002. I don't think we released it until like 2017. Now, it's not like I worked on it every day for 15 years. I might walk away from it for 6 months at a time, but I kept going back trying to get it, and it took a long time.
I haven't smelled it, so I don't know, but it seems like that would be something that you would have an abstract take on, but because I can't imagine puppy's breath smelling all that great.
Well, we're talking puppies, not dogs.
Okay,
it is pretty sweet.
All right. Their hygiene gets worse the less they brush as they get older.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But then again, remember, my customers may not be your typical fragrance customer. I think our customer falls into really 2 aspects. Someone who would not wear a designer fragrance but nevertheless likes the simpler fragrance experience,
Mm-hmm.
and someone who is a designer fragrance aficionado who uses Demeter either as something they layer on top of an existing fragrance or as an alternative, as in my example of jeans versus ball grounds.
Do you have one that smells like jeans? Or any kind of like fabric?
We actually don't have a denim fragrance. We do have linen, and and sunshine. The description of sunshine is a cotton T-shirt warming in the sun.
Okay. I'll have to go back and think about that when I smell it again. What's your favorite and or least favorite fragrance in Demeter's line?
The least is lobster,
And you still make it?
and when we run out of the materials, I will celebrate.
So you don't restock?
No, I will not restock those materials.
Okay.
No, I will not.
Okay.
The sooner they run out, the better.
How about your favorite?
Patchouli.
Patchouli.
Patchouli, I think, is a very important and traditional fragrance note that I think gets a very bad rap.
Mm-hmm.
Because in earlier years, there was a lot of bad synthetic patchouli floating around that has nothing to do with the all-natural patchouli that we make, or like Tom Ford's white patchouli. It's a completely different thing that happens to share a name. So I'm willing to proselytize all the time for the benefits of patchouli. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. I've noticed that too. It definitely has that hippie reputation, but it's a really nice smelling material.
Yeah, but if you get one that's natural and not synthetic, it's one of those things. I'm a big fan of naturals.
Mm-hmm.
You can do synthetics rather. You can do things with synthetics you can't do with naturals. I have found naturals to be way more aggressive in terms of allergic reactions than people realize, more so than synthetics. And but sometimes there is something in the natural that you just can't easily replicate in any other way. Mm-hmm. And patchouli is absolutely one of those materials.
So if you're working with single notes and you're working with naturals and you have something called patchouli, is it just patchouli?
No, you've got to round it out.
Yeah.
A single note is rarely, if ever, really a single ingredient.
Right.
It's what I aim for in making a single note fragrance is that you don't notice the other things. Mm-hmm. They're there, they make it work, but you only notice the heart.
Right. Is there an average amount of materials in your formulas? Or is that trade secrets?
I don't think of it that way.
I ask, I'm curious as an aspiring perfumer myself, or at least trying to make stuff that it's like, I feel like, I'm failing if I don't have like 30 or more materials, because I'm like, do fine fragrances even like, can they work with less than, 20 or?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Look, we're about simplicity. So we're at the opposite end of that spectrum. My goal is to get the result I want with the fewest ingredients possible. We want to be as simple and straightforward as we can be. The rest of the world is focused on complex fragrance. It leaves us as the photorealists all by ourselves, and I like that.
Right.
That's what a niche brand should be.
Yeah. Do you have any competition with people who are like making solo flores, like something that smells naturally like a flower of some sort?
I don't really feel like we do. There are a few people who do experience, real experience in an impressionistic way, but that's complex fragrance too.
Yeah.
And like Replica, where, you're not talking about salt air, you're talking about a walk on the beach, which is a much more complex experience and much more impressionistic.
Right. Because
for me, for starters, you want to do a fragrance walk on the beach. Are you in the Caribbean? Are you in Maine? Are you in the south of France? Those are completely different olfactory experiences to me.
Yeah.
But my approach is photorealistic, so that matters to me. It doesn't matter if you're doing impressionism as much. Right. Walk on the beach is a walk on the beach. So it's a whole different approach, And as a result, I'm looking for the opposite. I want to be simple and clean
Mm-hmm.
and identifiable. So I work in the opposite direction. And if I could do it with more, if I could do a patchouli that was just patchouli oil, that would be perfect
Right.
for me.
If you're working with another perfumer, do you have a brief that'll say like, we're doing Saltaire, but it has to be a walk on the beach, or do you work with them who might think something else about?
I try and do a short brief. Really a few sentences,
Mm-hmm.
because our fragrances are simple. It shouldn't take 3 pages to explain where I'm trying to go.
Yeah. Should get it by the title,
So,
pretty much.
right. So but I do tend to do a paragraph,
Mm-hmm.
and then we talk, and then as we modify, we talk it through. And then at some point I say, yeah, you're not quite getting it, give it to me, and then I'll finish it.
Yeah. Has there been anything that kind of, you were going for one single note, but then it started to develop like it might end up being a fine fragrance or kind of going off brand?
I have done single notes where I tried to make one thing and it ended up being another. Funeral Home was originally supposed to be Flower Show, so that's actually a good example. We had gone to the Philadelphia Flower Show, and we were trying to capture that moment. And one of the partners walked in, Christopher Gable, and said, "My God, that smells just like my uncle's funeral." And Flower Show became Funeral Home. We added a little mahogany, and off we went.
That's crazy. Did you also have like a corpse kind of note in there, or is it just flowers and wood? Hopefully,
no. We could have, but we didn't. It's the room.
Oh my gosh.
And then we tried to make baked bread, and I ended up modifying that into jelly donut. Don't ask me how we got from that to that, but it did happen.
Wow.
I can't explain how that went from A to B, but that's what it did.
Just added some, I don't know, raspberry or something. Right?
Well, yeah, because it didn't smell like bread. It smelled like a donut. So I made it jelly donut.
Okay. Wow. Would that inspire you to go off on a series like now, chocolate donut, or,
If it had
glazed.
done well commercially, sure.
Yeah.
But that sort of bordered on that question of, is it really wearable or not?
Yeah. What are your best sellers?
Baby powder is by far and away the best seller.
Do you think if someone did an A/B test between actual baby powder and your fragrance, it would be similar or different, telling a different story?
I think it would be really similar.
Okay.
Our baby powder was inspired by Johnson & Johnson baby powder, and the core smell of that was Italian talc.
Mm-hmm.
So it had a very, very clear focus. When I have a focus that clear, you're going to have trouble telling the difference. As a matter of fact, my experience is going to be bigger and bolder. It's going to be the same thing, but more.
Yeah. And you're working with different elements. I mean, if it's a spray versus powder, obviously.
Yes. Well, because the scent in baby powder was naturally occurring. It was the core element was the talc, was the Italian talc, and it also imparted that unique smell.
Did you use some sort of talc or I don't know how you would extract from that.
No, but I use that for the target.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had a very clear target. Mm-hmm. And usually when we have a clear target, we have the technology and the experience and the skill to really get there.
Yeah. Do you use, speaking of technology, do you use like headspace technology, which can capture an aroma and where you can chemically identify it?
We do use headspace technology, but okay. I find headspace is a starting point, not an ending point. Mm-hmm. That if you just rely on headspace, you can miss the subtleties and you don't round out the scent properly.
Yeah.
It takes more than technology to make perfume. Perfume, we can have an argument about whether, how much art there is in perfumery, mm-hmm. but there's definitely some.
Yeah, I would think so. What's your other, you said baby powder is a big seller. Is there any others that are like kind of more novel or strange?
Well, I think baby powder was fairly novel when we when we thought about it as a wearable fragrance. But Like dirt selling well 25 years later. Thunderstorm sells really well.
How is dirt selling? Seems like the opposite of what you'd want to smell like. And
It's such a beautiful fragrance. If you think about potting soil as opposed to dust in the corner,
yeah,
it's got that very rich and compelling scent.
mm-hmm.
But our job is to realize that that's a beautiful fragrance, that that's a beautiful smell. It's not your job to recognize that.
Yeah.
Our job is to recognize all those everyday smells that you pass over because you're busy.
Right.
And our job is to make you remember that makes you feel good.
Have you ever considered going beyond the single notes? Like maybe you're working with these notes and you smell two things to come together. I guess funeral home was one example of that, but just something where it's like, this could be good, like table this for some other abstract fragrance.
The answer is yes, but I try and stick to my knitting. And the reason for that is there are any number of fabulous perfumers out there doing complex fragrances and impressionistic fragrances.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really need me to do that too?
Right.
Am I really adding something if that's how I approach it? I don't think so. I'm much happier staying in our niche. Now, the interesting thing about single note fragrances, we use complexity as jargon in fragrance. When we say complex, it has a very particular meaning. And that meaning is that it has a dry down, that it's the nature of the fragrance will change over time. Let me back up a little bit and talk about the construction of a complex fragrance.
Also, you're making a lot of noise with it.
Okay. We're going to take a short break here because I need more coffee.
Good. Hey, so do I. Perfect. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're taking a break for some fresh brewed coffee, which, if you haven't guessed, is yes, another of Demeter's fragrances, but don't drink that one. While that's happening, let me tell you what's brewing at patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. Over there, you can join me and a community of others in supporting the show and getting a glimpse backstage, so to speak, with outtakes from shows, including this episode. Mark's got a great Play-Doh story for you. And for as little as $2 a month, you can help me produce and promote Friends with Deficits and still be able to afford your next Demeter scent. I'm wearing Siberian pine right now. The actual pine cones, not the fragrance. I know, I'm weird. For more of this kind of weird, take a look at patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. Now, back to my conversation with Mark Crames. Where are you, by the way?
Great Neck. It's about 15 miles outside of Midtown.
Cool. Is that where the factory is, where Demeter is?
The factory's in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Central Pennsylvania. Middle of nowhere.
Do you hop back and forth?
Yes, I do. I've been there already this week.
How far is that?
3.5 to 4 hour drive. 204 miles door to door. But who's counting?
How big is the company, just in terms of employees? And
we're a small group. We run between 20 and 25 people, depending on the time of year.
Okay.
And most of them are related by blood or marriage.
A family business.
It really is a family business. It's my wife and I are partners. 3 of my sons work in the business. My mother-in-law, my sister-in-law. We have a significant other of one of the boys. One of my other daughter-in-laws ran the factory for many years.
Wow. That made me think about the original owners. I know Christopher Brocious. I can't remember the other guy's name.
Christopher Gable.
Okay. Are they competition at this point? Because they were doing, obviously, this similar thing. They started it.
Well, no. Christopher Gable stayed with us. Christopher, unfortunately, passed away about 2 years ago. And Brocious runs a company called CV I Hate Perfume.
Right.
But it's, I don't think it's much bigger than Demeter was when I bought it, which was about $500,000 or $600,000 in annual sales. So it's a small niche thing. It's not, and it's the opposite of we are. Well, we've strived for affordability. That's high end, very niche fragrance. So we really don't even travel in the same circles. Although probably think about the only other one who thinks about fragrance the same way. I mean, I learned to think about fragrance this way from Christopher, not the other way around.
Yeah.
He's the original. I'm carrying on his tradition, and he's moved on to more complex things. So we started this part of the conversation by saying the complexity has a unique meaning in fragrance. It doesn't mean that there's just a lot of stuff going on. You can be complex in the normal sense and still be single note, meaning you don't have a dry down. Complexity simply means it changes over time. And the master perfumer does that by combining single notes that will express themselves naturally at different points and different periods of time.
Right.
So, for example, I couldn't have stuffed any more notes, any more smells into Morocco if I tried, or New Zealand. But they're single note fragrances.
Morocco and New Zealand? I hadn't heard of those.
Morocco and New Zealand. We have a collection called the Destination Collection.
Ah, okay.
That was inspired by my travels and the unique smells of the different places I've gone. And of course, you try and capture a place that's much more complex, much more stuff going on than a baby powder single note, for example,
right,
or rain. But you can still be single note. So you asked me the question about whether I needed, to expand my creative powers into complex fragrances. And the answer is I do that by making single notes that are complex in the traditional sense of the word, common sense of the word, but not in the jargon fragrance sense of the word. So I'm making single note fragrances where there's a ton of stuff going on. And that's satisfying to me without having to get into dry downs and staying within our concept.
Yeah.
And I think our customer expects a certain thing from us. They can get that other thing 50 other places, but they can only get that one thing from us.
Yeah.
So I try and stick to that knitting.
Yeah. Are there other like side businesses or anything like that within fragrance or anything that you were pursuing or would pursue?
I have found that within Demeter, I can pretty much do whatever I want. It accommodates anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we've done licenses, and again, I've tried to do our licenses with brands that have unique smells. Hershey, Jelly Belly. Those are all things that have iconic smells. And Annie's has an iconic smell. So those are what we really, really specialize in.
If you're working with one of those companies, are you getting a percentage of their sales, if I assume, or you're licensing the scent to them, or how does that work?
It works a couple of different ways. Like with Jelly Belly and Hershey, we actually licensed it, and they got 5% of the sales.
Okay.
They got a standard fragrance royalty. In other situations, like Cheeto and Aunt Annie's, they're really PR stunts.
Mm-hmm.
So we make the product for them, and it's usually a one-shot or a two-shot deal.
And do they sell it, or they're giving it away, or?
They do both.
Yeah.
They'll give it away to the press, but then they'll usually sell it to their fans who go nuts over it.
Yeah.
So, but it garners a lot of attention, and you get a couple of $1 million worth of publicity, because anything that's disruptive like that, nobody is looking for an Aunt Annie's pretzel fragrance. So it's attention grabbing and it's disruptive.
Yeah.
Because of its uniqueness. And that's what they're looking, that's what companies with these iconic smells are looking for. They're not looking to turn that smell into another product that they can sell. They're looking to sell the product they make all their money with already, and keeping it fresh.
So what's next for Demeter, or for you?
Well, I think next for Demeter and for me is probably to work through two things. One is we've become more and more of a direct-to-consumer brand, and that's really who we want to be at this point. So I'm not going to turn down an opportunity like an HEB,
Mm-hmm.
but not our focus. We want to be in direct contact with our customers. We've upgraded the website. We've upgraded our visual image, and that's all my son Ross. And I think that will be is the future for us. The future for me is to get my three sons to be running this, and for me to step out and go to the beach.
Sounds good.
In a perfect world, they run the company, and I get to do the perfumery and nothing else.
How far along, or how close do you think you are to that goal?
I'm going to be 69 in December, and I would like to be there before I'm 75. Ideally, 72 sounds good to me.
Okay.
But and I'm not really looking to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm certainly would be happy to do less at this point, and I am doing less. That definitely has started already. It's not over yet.
Right.
But I also have a much younger wife, so I'm not sure if she's ready to retire anyway. So we'll have to see how that all works out.
While you're on the beach and she's busy slaving away at Demeter.
Right. That would not be what I was looking for. So it's much more likely. Well, I use the beach for shorthand. It's much more likely I'll spend the days in the woods and the mornings doing perfumery.
All right. That's good. When you say doing perfumery, I mean, is that talking to other perfumers, or really like, do you have a lab as far as your
Both.
own work? Okay.
Both.
Yeah.
Most of what I do is work with other perfumers
Mm-hmm.
and talk them through where I'm trying to get to. That's the majority of what I'm doing in perfumery. I do all the concentration studies. So once I have an oil I'm deciding how intense it has to be.
Yeah.
And it's also in the course of that I'll tend to make that modifications might come to me, and I might finish the blend in a different way.
And most of your stuff is cologne, right? Or is it now it's oils? Is that what's happening?
We make cologne and we make perfume oils. When I bought the company, we made cologne.
And by cologne, we're just talking about the concentration, right? Like
That's right.
Alcohol base, but a lower concentration. Yeah.
Everything's more concentrated than it was when I bought the company. The concentrations have increased significantly over the years. They've almost doubled on the average. And we call ours pick-me-up sprays. I'm actually sorry we called it cologne at all. I would have, because there is no legal requirement. It could just be a pick-me-up stuff. The idea originally was that these fragrances were designed to change your mood. It wasn't about changing how somebody else thought about you, which is really what most of fragrance is, most of fashion is. It was about fragrance changes the way you feel. Put on what you love every couple of hours and you're going to feel better when you smell it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was about fragrance for you, not fragrance for everybody else.
I actually was trying to fit this into like friends with deficits and thinking like there's a certain, I wouldn't call it a deficit, but a certain limitation in your brand or a kind of.
Well, it was a limitation in me, quite frankly. I had I had prostate cancer,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a wonderful thing to have, obviously, but most men with prostate cancer are back at work in 4 to 6 weeks, if not less.
Yeah.
Mine did not work out that way. I was diagnosed in September of 2019.
Mm.
And I had my prostate removed with robotic surgery I want to say it was November. And that surgery, which most men are back at their desk in 3 weeks, killed me. I ended up with hematomas from my armpit to my waist.
Oh my gosh.
And it took me almost a year to recover fully from the surgery. And that it had beat me up so badly. Plus, of course, I was on the prostate version of chemo, which is hormone deprivation, which is pretty exhausting. When they cut off your testosterone, it's hard to generate a lot of energy. So that was very hard for me. And as soon as I started feeling better from the surgery, I had to have radiation. Literally 3 weeks after I started feeling better, I underwent 35 days of radiation.
Oh my gosh.
And I tolerated that pretty well for the first 4 or 5 weeks, and then just got, again, crushed by it.
Jesus.
Like not able to get out of bed stuff. And it turns out that the radiation, there's so much stuff they just don't tell you. So it takes a long time to really bounce back from the radiation. And just something I was not aware of. Everyone who's had radiation is aware. So that put me out for another year. And then I started feeling good about 15, 16 months later, and I had a reoccurrence.
Oh, no.
And I had to go back on chemo and another round of radiation. Finally, on August 15th of 2023, I was declared in remission, and I've stayed in remission since then. So it was 4 years of treatment, and about a year after the treatment ended till I started really feeling strong again. And we'll see where it ends up.
Is your prognosis good for now?
You know what? It's fine until it's not.
No.
I literally had a test yesterday, and it was undetectable.
That's good.
So, but every time you go, at least my own experience, every time I go for one of those tests, I start getting crazy about 24 hours before, and then I stay crazy for another 36 hours till I get the results.
Crazy, like just nervous or anxious? Yeah.
Yeah, just anxious. And you can't talk to me, and there's nothing rational about it. And that's just the way I assume it's going to be the rest of my life. So, and now my problem now is a little more, prosaic. I'm now out of shape at 68, which is not a wonderful thing. I was climbing mountains at 63, and now I can do about 2 miles flat. So that's the challenge, is how do you get back in shape at this point in my life?
Yeah. Is working at Demeter taxing physically, at least?
I'm so involved with production stuff at this point that it does, give me a little bit of physical activity, which is good for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge to get back to where I was, and we'll see how that works out. That for me is, now that I'm through it, that's the challenge, and either that'll happen or it won't.
Yeah. Here's a question I ask all my guests: is what, if anything, are the benefits of what you've gone through?
That's a little hard. It was just such much a longer road than I anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what came out of it that was really positive is my own perspective, obviously. I was never even thinking about stopping working until all this. And it forced me to move more responsibility to other people, particularly my boys, and that turned out to be the best thing I ever could have done.
That's great.
And I don't know if I would have done it as soon otherwise.
Did the company dip, or was it an emergency situation where your sons had to take over? Or?
It wasn't an emergency because we were a pretty good company.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens in the absence of leadership, this all happened to me right during the pandemic. I had surgery in November 2019, and the pandemic was declared in March of 2020, less than 6 months later.
Mm-hmm.
And by February, because of my international context, because I handled all the export work, I knew what was going on out in the world before people did here.
Hmm.
Now, I can't say that I did anything about it, but I knew that we had a serious problem coming. And we survived the pandemic by converting to making hand sanitizer.
Oh, wow.
I don't think we would have survived if we didn't. It was really interesting. It was a very narrow window because we're a small company.
Mm-hmm.
We would not have survived, being shut down. So the FDA, if you recall, hand sanitizer was a very big deal at that point in time. They didn't really understand transmission in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't get it. So I had read that distilleries were making hand sanitizer. And I just had an epiphany. The one thing that we own is an alcohol license. I can get alcohol. And the FDA published an emergency regulation with a formula that if you would produce hand sanitizer to this formula, you could sell it without further FDA approval or an FDA approval of your factory. And we are not an FDA approved factory. We weren't making drugs.
Mm-hmm.
We're making perfume. That regulation allowed us to make hand sanitizer when it was hard to get. And it got us through until we could start making and selling perfume again.
Was it like, pizza scented hand sanitizer or just?
Yeah, you could not scent it because that would change the formula. It had to be unscented. And later we actually did get FDA, we are FDA registered and approved, and we have a fragrance approval that we can use. But it didn't really become a business for us once the pandemic was over. It could be a whole separate business with our fragrance range, but it would take much more intentionality than I put against it to this point.
Right.
We faced one other big challenge, which we're still recovering from as a company, which was the war in Russia.
Oh, really?
20% of our business was in Russia and Ukraine. My background before I bought Demeter in distribution was international. So not shockingly, when I bought Demeter, I built out the international distribution quite well. In the middle of everything else with the cancer treatments and everything else, we lost 20% of our business literally overnight.
Why do you have that market, do you think?
I don't think anyone else spent a lot of time there, quite frankly. When you're a small company, you have the choice of going to Europe and competing with everyone in their home markets head to head. Mm-hmm. We went to other places. So we built businesses in Japan and China and Korea, which were not homes that don't have their own native grown fragrance business. Russia was a big part of that.
Did you have to sell them on your kind of brand identity, what you're trying to do?
No, they fell in love with the concept. And they built a fantastic business. And then it unfortunately went away literally overnight. Wow. It's one of those interesting things about the way that we've chosen to prosecute war right now economically. We were a victim that nobody talks about. It was a financial victim. No one was shooting at us.
Yeah.
But I'd spent 10 years building a $1 million business in Russia and Ukraine. And now we probably sell $50,000 a year to Ukraine. Maybe.
Are there other things that you sent? I mean, you mentioned candles and diffusers, obviously cologne.
Cologne, perfume oil, lotions, gels, diffusers, and candles. We don't make candles in everything, but we make those other products in virtually every sector.
Cool. I didn't know about the lotion. I'll have to get some dirt lotion or something.
Well, it's actually, lotion's is nice because I'm sure you're aware that of traditional layering, that if you use a lotion or a body oil to create a surface on the skin before you spray on your cologne or eau de toilette, it will last much, much longer.
Yeah.
The fragrance molecules actually bind to the oils in your skin. And that's one of the reasons why you hear people occasionally say something doesn't smell well on them or doesn't smell right. It's because their oils react with the fragrance oils in a not nice way.
Right.
So there's a very personal aspect to that. But it is also those oil molecules in your skin that the fragrance bind to and make it longer lasting. So if you create that sort of slick, oily, moisturized surface, the fragrance will last much longer on it. So if you put on a dirt lotion and then spray dirt on top of it, it's going to be much longer lasting. Now, the really cool thing about Demeter is you don't have to wear the same fragrance. You could put on a dirt lotion and spray grass over it or whatever else you want. And, so with most fragrances, you need either an unscented or a matching oil so they don't clash, or lotion so they don't clash. With Demeter, that's not the case. You can layer with lotion and a cologne as well as you can layer with multiple colognes.
Yeah. Are there some interesting combinations like that? Like you mentioned dirt and grass. I hadn't even thought of that, like people layering different notes.
Well, that's a huge part of Demeter. Because we make single notes, that means I'm giving you the tools to make your own fragrance.
Yeah.
You can create your own signature scent by blending it in a bottle or laying it right on top of the skin. And I find that the single best rule is that if things work together in the world, they will work together in your fragrance.
How do you mean?
So if coffee and angel food cake go together in the world, you can wear those two fragrances together and they'll like each other.
Wow. Have you experimented with that? Does that seem to be the case with most of this stuff?
Well, I know that for a fact.
Wow.
If you follow nature, it's hard to go wrong.
Yeah.
If they work in life, they're going to work in fragrance.
Is the opposite true too? Like, you wouldn't want to mix lobster and patchouli or something like that?
It's not as true. It's not as ironclad.
Yeah.
But it probably would smell exactly like it sounds.
Yeah. That's interesting. Wow. Anything else we haven't covered that you feel like talking about? Or?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of points.
Well, yeah, thanks again. It was really a pleasure, and good luck with everything. And if you're in Austin, give me a holler.
I will be in February. When I have the dates, I'll let you know. We'll grab a cup of coffee and a taco.
All right, and maybe wear taco and coffee fragrance. All right. Thanks again to my guest, Mark Crames of Demeter Fragrance. For more about Mark's work, look no further than demeterfragrance.com, or HEB, I guess. And to keep Friends with Deficits smelling great, visit patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. I'll leave a link in the show notes. You can also listen, like, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts for free, and tell your friends about the show. Once again, I'm Adam Sultan, and whatever you're wearing, wear it well.